well, just to get a grip of where we're at, we're going to talk. I got told by a viewer that you'd be interested in talking free will and determinism with me because I'm a proponent of free will, and you're not. That's correct, right?
I'm not sure exactly what that means, a proponent, but I thought we could just start by discussing our understandings of free will and its implications and determinism and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, shall I go first or shall you go first? I'm happy either way, mate.
Let me think a little bit about how we want to structure this. So basically, when I use the term determinism, it's basically just the idea that I think all things are the result of causal events, that basically all things are reactions to other things that happen and set those events in motion. And that this basically extrapolates all the way down even to human behaviors. And that I think that the reasoning process is like a real process. I think that human consciousness is a real thing that we experience, and the decision-making process is a real thing that we experience. We, can evaluate some information that we are aware of, and then we make a rational decision based on that information. That's not all the decisions we make. We make plenty of decisions that are, maybe completely reflexive or totally subconscious or something like that. But at the very least, I'm aware that the decision-making process exists. But that it's ultimately still predetermined or that sort of thing, that it's the result of a causal chain of events.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be predetermined in the sense that it's
fatal or anything like that, sure, or fatalistic.
Yeah, you could say that you're saying that it could be a mechanistic account of nature from which it conforms to, let's say, necessary material causal interactions which lead to outcomes which are necessary. It's and I would agree that I think that not with your position but with your take on causation, that causation is a necessary relationship between events, that that a cause-effect relationship is something in which for example, it couldn't be that that an effect would not proceed, not actually that a cause would not be antecedent to an event, so that every event that we observe has a cause within physical reality. An example might be, the only thing that I could think that would necessarily maybe be an argument against this would be maybe quantum physics. And I used to go this way, lean this way in terms of maybe the human mind is quantum sensitive and so on like that. And that's an argument given by a guy called Roger Penrose, where he says there is an indeterminacy within nature, within quantum, the quantum realm. It's necessarily indeterminate, and then it collapses into something which is physically concrete, the waveform collapses into, let's say, like a particle, and then that observed particle is an object, but it spontaneously came into being, so it didn't have a cause which is necessarily antecedent to the effect. If that makes sense.
I don't think I know what antecedent means.
Prior, just prior.
Got it.
It inferentially prior. So So event A would necessarily come before event B.
So what does this mean for free will? Can you quickly give me your idea of free will and the extent that you think it exists?
Well, I think that if your account of what we are is correct, then free will could not exist. That would be like a physicalist or materialist account. You would see that you see this actually this argument being made by a lot of people who are proponents of physics today, who believe that the universe and everything that we observe is actually boils down to physical objects. And if that's the case, then I would say it necessarily can't be the case, and that's where we're going to maybe disagree. But if that is the case, then yeah, free will couldn't exist because the causal chain would predetermine human actions, and if human actions were reducible to material causation, then yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. And I think it's a pretty intuitive position to hold, and I think that it is very popular in those who are proponents of science. Although I believe that the position is fundamentally anti-scientific in its constitution.
I think I understand where you're going. That we're like, generally when I talk about this, I do have to make the disclaimer that I am taking some things on faith. Like, for example, the idea that human thoughts and behavior is the result of like electrochemical interactions in the brain that are ultimately physical. Or I do have to make some assumption that like all things in the universe are like physical or material in the way that we would define that. That everything that happens in the universe is the result of things that take place in the universe, whether we can detect them or not. Like that is an assumption I'm making.
Yeah, but it's also an assumption which I think leads to an absurdity. And I think Immanuel Kant really pointed this out in the Antinomies of Pure Reason. So before we get into the sort of the depths in that, do you know anything about David Hume?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so David Hume basically argued for what's called the problem of induction. So like, why should I believe that the sun will rise tomorrow simply because it rose today, right? Why should I believe that there is a causal inference built into nature? Like, why should I look at causation as it necessarily exists? And one, he points out that we need to assume this. Like, basically, we make judgments within the world off this. And if this assumption, like, the world is not uniform and that there is not a causal relationship between event A and event B, then this inference didn't always hold. Then our judgments are detached from reality. They're basically fictions that they're placing upon reality, and they're based off past experiences. And that's what he argued, that we look towards empirical observation. We see one event and we see another event. He uses the example of, let's say, billiard balls. We see one billiard ball roll off and strike another billiard ball. So we see an event A and event B, but he says he sees no cause in the event. You don't see causation. So if you're basing this off pure empirical observation, no matter how you attempt to look at it, you aren't going to see a causal inference between those events. You are going to simply see a conjunction between those events. One event and then another event, and then you assume that event somehow caused that event. And this is a habit of the mind and not necessarily a relationship between a necessary mechanistic relationship between objects. And he's basically calling into question Newtonian physics in his time. Locke's defense of Newtonian physics, really, or philosophical exposition of Newtonian physics. So the issue. So do you understand that?
Yeah, I think I understand it. I'm going to rephrase it really quick, because I think you are a PhD philosophy student, and like the idea is that we can have this conversation and that hopefully I can parlay some of these ideas to a layman that's not as familiar with these concepts or philosophers and that sort of thing. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and restate the idea. The idea is we see something that we would normally attribute causation to, but there's got to be some, like, it's difficult for us to pin down and point to the exact mechanism of causation. For example, even two billiard balls striking each other, we see one strike the other, we observe that, but ultimately something is happening that we're not observing that must be objectively and as granularly as possible responsible for the reaction happening as a result of the action happening, and that we can't actually see that, or it seems like no matter wherever we are in terms of our ability to experiment and test and observe things, there's always another layer that we seem to be able to go. Is that the idea? So ultimately, like, our entire conception of causation is built on inferences.
Yeah, like that's right. Yeah, it's built off these inferences, and these inferences are a priori to experience, like they're prior to experience.
So hang on, I want to dazzle you here with some terminology that you may appreciate. So basically the idea is that anything that we would normally consider to be causal, that basically everything that we would say is the reaction of something or a consequence or an outcome of something, is ultimately necessarily ad hoc ergo propter hoc, that sort of thing, like that sort of fallacious thinking.
I'm not sure if I understand those words. So like ad hoc as in post as, yeah, it's basically ad hoc onto the experience.
Basically, the idea is like ad hoc ergo propter hoc. My understanding is that it's like a logical fallacy that states that this thing happened because of that thing, that this thing happened and that thing happened, and you're just trying to ascribe that this thing happened because that thing happened before it, and that ultimately this is what we're doing in every situation of a thing happening. Okay, cool.
Constant conjunction and the assumption of uniformity, and this is a habit of mind applied to our experiences.
Sure. I can understand that. Now, where I take issue with this is like, obviously there are assumptions being made on both sides of the fence here. So in the materialist or determinist worldview, it's true that I am making the assumption that there is some causal event, whether or not we can ultimately boil it down to its most granular level and observe it and be able to prove objectively that this is as deep as it goes. Whether or not we can see that, I am making the assumption that it is happening, that there must be something, whether or not we can see it yet. And that the best we can do is just like ascribe to the objectivity of that like mechanism through empiricism and like shared observations and consistency and testing. And you're saying that's not necessarily the case, and we shouldn't jump to that conclusion until we're there, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Well, yes and no. I'm actually saying that not only are you making the assumption, but I would argue that I would agree with Kant and say that actually your experience of an object is fundamentally based on these a priori categories. And so not only is this a point of not simply just a habit of mind, so where Hume would basically say that this is just a habit of mind that we necessarily have fallen into. And so we are just essentially condemned to probabilistic accounts of reality, or inductive accounts of reality. Kant responds to this, and I think actually before I do that, I need to say basically, Hume is showing that in the experience, within the explanation itself, is actually a priori component, which is existing in the mind itself. And it cannot exist in experience. It cannot exist in something what it would be titled like synthetic or a posteriori, like after experience. It cannot exist in the experience itself. It exists in the mind. Now, what Kant's response to that is basically the experience itself is only like the object or material reality that we exist in can only be understood in a mind. Mm-hmm. And so there is a fundamentally immaterial component which makes reality
why does it have to be fundamentally immaterial?
Because it exists, it's applied by the faculty of mind and not necessarily by it's a priori. It happens prior to the experience, and not within the object which we are empirically analyzing. Like no matter how many like objects you look at, you aren't going to find the necessary cause or the necessary what would be the conditions for causation. But moreover, what Kant's going to say is that there are other, even more fundamental categories which unify this experience of material objects to be material objects, namely space and time. And this is like, so he would say reality, which is conformed to space and time, is matter. And space and time are faculties of our mind which give how do I put this? Give reality, or not reality, give
that breathe meaning into our concept of reality.
Yeah, exactly. Breathe meaning would be a good way to put it. Like give understanding, give us the capacity to understand reality.
I want to put a pin in this. Go ahead, but I want to put a pin in this and come back to it if you don't want me to interrupt now.
Yeah. It's just quickly, just essentially that means that there's an a priori aspect to our conception of reality, which then makes causation come into effect, as in the category of causation comes into effect at the point of observation and not prior to it. Sorry.
So it seems like it would be maybe more accurate to say that literally everything we experience might be is I think we can sort of make the inference that everything that we experience as a facsimile of something that exists outside of our mind, that's being recreated in our mind in a way that we can experience it and conceptualize it. When we see something, we're seeing what we think are light rays bouncing off it and going in through our eyes, and then our brain takes that information, and then there's something that happens in our brain that allows us to be able to see the image. That we're not really seeing that image in its existence as much as we're seeing an image of it being presented to us by our brain and its interpretation of these signals, these physical signals or something. Or at the very we can only make the case that that's what's happening. Now, that I feel like there's an assumption being made that it happening in our mind is not material, when in reality, I would just say, can it be the case that like that entire process of signals entering in through our senses, this is basically the fundamental tenets of solipsism, right? That we cannot experience the world outside of our ability to perceive it through our senses. That these experiences are reaching us and like causing stimulations in our senses that are reaching our brains, and then our brains is offering our conscious mind, like a representation or a facsimile of those experiences. Can that not all be material?
It wouldn't be. So it wouldn't be solipsistic necessarily, but it would be idealistic, and it would be a necessarily component of idealism, specifically like Berkeleyan idealism. Like if a tree falls in the wood and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, the point is that a sound is something which is interpreted by someone with sense organs, who then makes it intelligible and understands it within their brain. And he basically makes the argument that, well, actually everything that we see in the external world is, if we assume empiricism, we necessarily have to become idealists, because empiricism would mean that we exist in our brains and not in reality. We exist in like what is fundamentally a mental construction, rather than reality. Now, you could say, and I think your point there was to say, like, I think there's two responses, and I think your point was to say, well, could we not explain this in materialistic terms, in physical terms? Yes, we can, and Kant accepts that we are physical beings. He does think that we have organs and brains and so on. Mm-hmm. But that, this is epistemically necessarily downstream from our empirical experiences. So like our observations themselves, which allow us to make these judgments that we are physical beings, in themselves already contain the mental component. And that mental component can't be explained with something prior to itself, because that mental component makes reality intelligible, and so is fundamental to the functioning of the understanding. So we can't understand something until it is being made to conform to something which makes it able to be understood. So we can't assume causation prior to our observation, which allows causation to be.
I understand. Sure, I understand that this is a sort of bottleneck in human consciousness.
This is why I think you hit the nail on the head before, when you said you would basically be saying that there is a reality external to us, which is, which we are seeing a facsimile of. Now, that is Kant's position. Like, he is actually saying, yes, there is a reality external to us that this is a facsimile of. We just don't know anything about that reality. And he calls that the noumena. We live in the phenomena, phenomena, meaning like the perceptual, the perceptual, like the perceivable reality. Like we live in our perceptions or understandings of reality. We don't live in reality itself, because reality itself does not necessarily even conform to space and time. There is no reason to believe it does conform to space and time.
There's no reason?
There's no reason beyond the presupposition of space and time within our observation of it. So we observe space and time. So like Hume basically pointed this out. Like if these a priori concepts, the only reason that we believe these a priori concepts exist is because of our observations. And what Kant's shown is that, the only reason we believe that these a priori concepts obtain is because we have what is akin to like a confirmation bias based upon generalizations of our experience. We reason inductively and make broad conclusions. And he basically says, well, Newtonian physics is doing that. Well, Kant is saying, well, no, Newtonian physics is actually explaining a mechanistic account of how reality must be, but it only must be this way for us. There is no reason to believe, let's say, like an alien, which had, let's say, an atemporal relationship with time, like the way that it experienced the passage of time and events, wouldn't perceive material interactions to be non-linear. And so our linear experiences of time may not actually have anything to do with the way that the universe actually functions, but may be entirely dependent upon our observations of it. But we can't remove these experiences of our notions of time, because then we would ultimately make the universe unintelligible to ourselves.
I understand the idea. The idea is that we experience time linearly, but that does not necessarily mean that it's like this is an objective way that time exists outside of our ability to experience it. And this, I'm not sure if it's fair. I feel like there's a lot of hyperbole being thrown around. For example, when you say we have no ability to calculate, our whether or not things exist outside of our, we have no reason to believe. I feel like you use the term, we have no reason to believe that a thing exists outside of our ability to experience its existence. I feel like that's like saying we have no reason to believe that murder occurs outside of all these like quantified murder cases that we have records of and video footage of and stuff like that. Like I feel like, oh, go ahead.
I think the difference would be that it's not that we don't like. So, for example, we have to accept that there is a thing, if you will, that exists outside of these concepts. But the only reason that we believe it is a specific thing is because of these concepts. So, where, for example, someone like John Locke would simply assume that reality contained intelligible particulars, Kant has said that particulars or individual beings of like individual things, determinate existence, determinate beings as Hegel calls them, or determinate objects rather, only exist after we've limited their existence to a certain format. Think of it like this. Like if I wasn't applying certain, like, for example, like what he describes as space and time, which is extension and figure. So basically the fundamentals of maths and geometry to reality, I would have no means of separating what he would describe as inner and outer sense, my thinking and the external world. I would have, so let's say my imagination. I would have no way of separating objects from each other if they're in physical contact. Why should I say that where one object starts and another ends? These are all categorical judgments. They're rational, they're logical, but they are necessarily dependent upon categories of the understanding.
Sure. What do you mean by categories of the understanding?
Concepts. So he would say that there's a fundamental faculties applied necessarily within what he calls pure intuition, which is like space and time, or extension and figure, which make our understanding, or which conform our objects, which conforms reality to our perceptions. So we experience, shapes, numbers, basically, in terms of like a linear, continuous experience. So we experience a psychological continuity. If we didn't experience that psychological continuity, we'd have no reason to believe that one event occurred before or after another, or if another, or that there wasn't, or in the terms of space, that there was a separation between objects at all. And without this conformity, reality would be, in theory, like I guess you could. Then I think that I think Dan Robinson makes this point, like from Oxford University. He's like, I think he says like it would probably take you like 2 years to work out that something's like a cup. You'd be like, is it like a cup? I think it's a cup, because you'd have to construct. Mm-hmm. Like if you're
what are the elements of making a cup? Like at what point does it stop being a cup? At what point does it start being a cup? I think I understand.
Yeah, I mean, at a fundamental level where you're like, I think that's a straight, like I'm trying to work out, like trying to think about the fundamental constitution of a straight line and constructing the idea of a straight line for a pragmatic account of reality. It doesn't work. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. I have a pretty good answer for the cup conundrum. At what point, the thing is that like cup as it exists is not like a thing that a cup doesn't really exist outside of our ability to define it, right? Like it's a part of language. It's more of a component of language. Cup. Things being couply is more a component and a function of language than it is a component of some objective reality that existed before human existence or without human existence. Like
what would you say was like a component of objective reality that exists prior? And
so like matter and energy or something seems to be a thing that occurs. Like we have terms to describe phenomena that occur that seems to like construct some framework of reality that tends to be applicable to like 100% of and corroborates everything that comes through our senses and through empiricism, right? So like things like matter and energy and the atom and that sort of stuff. Whereas a cup is something that is like a human construction, and its entire conception was invented by humans as far as we know, and can only be agreed upon and decided upon by other people. It's a function of language, right? Like if a cup, go ahead.
You're saying that like what a cup is defined by its function in relation to the individuals who are using it, and so what defines a cup on being a cup or not has a teleological component which may not be descriptively present within reality, and instead is conforming to our desires, essentially, our relationship with cups, or objective reality.
It's more like the word cup is a word. Cup is a word. Cup is not a property of the universe. Cup is not the property of an object. Cup is a word. And
I completely disagree again. I'm going to say that like there is a teleological component to reality as well. But there is a functional component of reality. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say it exists in cups. Like I think cups are cups because we make them cups. But why we?
Well, because we agree that the word cup is used to describe this object based on its components.
I agree. I mean, although that's necessarily a component part of all form. So when we talk about even the most fundamental corpuscular or atomistic explanations of reality, we are conforming it to our explanation of our empirical analysis. So take something like matter. What we understand to be matter is through observation and our agreement to form a language game based around that observation, which allows for certain means of analysis so that we can achieve certain goals rather than certain other goals. We could have defined it in a variety of different ways, depending upon the epistemological goal, depending upon the goal in which this epistemology or this field is actually aiming at. And so we've already agreed that, let's say, physics is an attempt to analyze material objects to explain a mechanistic account of reality, which is already an assumption that, let's say, and we already assume the existence of something like a causal explanation of reality, and let's say the physical and let's say the necessary physical or material components within that reality. Like, take something like energy. Energy itself seems like really somewhat ambiguous, in the sense that it doesn't necessarily even have, let's say, shape, but it always has magnitude. Energy is understood in terms of its energy is understood within a purely a priori relationship with itself, that it constructs and deconstructs in a way that allows waveforms to collapse into specific beings, to determinate objects. And we can observe this. Like, don't get me wrong, I think we do observe this, right? Like, I think we observe this every day. I'm not like saying energy doesn't exist, but I'm saying that our understanding of energy, even the name energy, what defines energy is a category of judgment about our experiences. And so this is all based off our experiences, nothing but our experiences. And those experiences...
Well, maybe, again, here's the hyperbole. Maybe not nothing but our experiences, but at the very least, our experience is one layer of corroboration that exists to just corroborate that stuff maybe exists outside of our experience.
Yeah, but I think the point that Kant's getting at is that the categories in which we use to judge, those a priori means of judging something, like those actual, and the capacity of the understanding itself is psychologically imbued within us to the point in which it's purely assumptive to believe that reality.
Maybe not purely assumptive, though. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think you'd be forced to say that it would have to be purely assumptive, because if you'd have to be able to say that we had some form of rational justification to say that these concepts exist external to our judgments. So every judgment, and if all of your judgments are based on these concepts, you're going to find that it's circular. You're going to be like, right, well, assuming that these concepts, like if I assume that these concepts exist, then reality is this way. And I must assume that these concepts, rather, my experience is dependent upon the existence of these concepts. Now, if I was to then say, well, wait a minute, what would reality be if I removed these concepts? Or rather, if I removed my understanding, would these concepts still be there? Well, we have no reason to believe that they would be there. Because the only way that we could judge that would be with the concepts themselves. It'd be like saying we've judged the existence of these concepts to be real based on the existence of these concepts.
Well, hang on. More than that, it's based on the consistency that the concepts can be applied and bear out in like experiments that avail themselves of these concepts, right? Like, and how they form components that seem to be, modular and applicable, right? They're like applicable. Like, I'm curious, what is the point of entertaining this thought experiment when we like past the point where we can there like exists so much the presence of predictive models that seem to be able to bear out with like such high consistency.
Oh yeah. I mean, what Kant's showing is that all of those predictive models are predictive only because of rational, like a priori, constitutes of our experience. Like, there is a logical component to our experience which is making reality intelligible.
Okay. So what is the function in assuming that there's anything other than that? So I think about like a rock. Okay, a rock is like an object that we perceive, and we can only perceive and understand a rock through the images and the sensory data that our minds are presenting to us and allowing us to conceptualize this rock through. We agree there, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, actually, if I may, why don't we run with the rock, and I'll just try and kind of go Socratic with it, like, and I'll just ask you questions about.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds fun.
So what's a rock?
Well, rock is a word specifically that is used to describe a specific object. And when I use this word, it evokes an image in your head, and it like motivates your conceptual faculties to come up with a similar concept to one that's in my brain, such that we can shake hands and agree when we start to compare all the elements of it.
Okay. And when we compare these elements, we might see that, like, for example, the constitution of a rock is like limestone.
Sure.
Or something. And that limestone is like limestone because, and not granite because of it being made of calcium carbonate. And that calcium carbonate is the way it is and has that material structure because of its molecular.
We would probably start. We would probably start much more shallow than this, right? We would say, well, a rock is this thing that's made of some type of stone or some natural thing that is hard. Before we decide on limestone versus granite or something, we would probably agree on, some physical properties of it. It's like this brittle. It is this color. It has these, color patterns or something. And then we would go on to explain why does it have this surface? How can we corroborate that its surface is maybe rough in the way that we would describe rough? It seems to be rough to the touch. What are some ways we can use empiricism to examine whether or not, its existence as rough is similar to how I feel it, or that there's some level of corroboration going on here? We could, we would start at a more shallow level and go deeper and deeper. And like, this is, go ahead.
What would be the empirical methodology implied? Applied?
So for example, I think rocks are a really good example because we can feel them and we can get more information than we get more information about the roughness of a rock, and it's like how it exists in the physical world outside of our ability to experience it through the sense of sight. For example, we're not able to see the roughness of sandpaper the way that we can feel it, right? And then if we take a microscope and we are able to amplify the image, the light signals that come off sandpaper at a much higher level of magnification than our eyes are capable of, we sort of can understand, so this is why this feels the way it does, even though it doesn't necessarily look the way that it does.
Okay. So just to kind of push back on that, so let's just say, so I take the corroboration. The reason that we're trying to corroborate something is because we realize that we cannot gain knowledge, or at least we do not gain certitude from observation, as in our senses can deceive us.
Correct.
Yeah. And not only do our senses deceive us, but they do not provide us with all the information, at least without reflecting upon those senses. So even if there has to be like an intellectual component where it's like, okay, sensibility is giving us this information. And then if we analyze that sensibility, we gain additional information, which is like, all right, it feels rough because it's essentially uneven. It's like quite an uneven surface.
Right.
And now the issue is, like, this is all true. That's fine. Like, you can say that, like, we do scientifically analyze, let's say, rocks. We understand them to be, like, rough, based off these, this material analysis. And we engage in this material analysis to gain knowledge, which is external to the experience itself. Now, the direct experience itself. So, like, for example, most of physics is done in maths. They use maths to extrapolate an explanation of reality. Mm-hmm. So what Hume is showing is that all of this maths, all of this reflexing, is based off what he would describe as an impression. So you see the world, you observe the world, that impresses an idea into your mind, or like it gives you an idea. You then use that idea and create links between other ideas based off other experiences you have and other ideas you have. You bundle them together and then you say that's reality. But there are two issues there. Your impressions themselves, there is no reason to believe that those impressions, like that, those sense experiences, actually give you information about reality external to your like mind's eye, like, you know, your experience.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the fact that your judgments about those that sensibility itself has nothing to do with the sensibility. It has to do with your judgments, which cannot be in that sensibility. And so you enter what's called Meno's paradox, in which, how do you gain, this is, Meno basically points out, in Plato's Meno, he points out that you cannot have knowledge of something. Like, why do you need to have knowledge of something that, can you gain knowledge of something you don't already know? Because how could you investigate something you don't already know? And if you already know it, then why investigate it? Now, the explanation is partial knowledge, right? The only way you can kind of get out of this is go, oh, well, I don't have full and complete knowledge, but I have partial knowledge of it, right? Unless you go the whole Platonic way and just say, I actually do have complete knowledge of it. and I'm just remembering it. But I don't think anyone does that these days. But, well, some people do actually, but that's just to say, you say partial knowledge. Like most people would say, oh yeah, I have some knowledge of reality that I've gained through the senses, but not complete knowledge of it. I know it's rough, but I don't know why it's rough, right? What Hume is basically doing is saying that the concept of roughness, of like not simply the the concept of roughness is a sensible experience. Like, that is just an idea you've had impressed upon you. But your judgment of why it's rough is an additional idea which was not present in that initial one, and is not actually partially contained within that experience, and so is necessarily severed from that experience, which is why he says you have matters of fact, which is the sensible, observable world, and you have relations of ideas, or beliefs about the external world. And you cannot bridge that gap without just making a direct assumption of uniformity, that there is, that reality conforms to your experience that you've had of it so far, that it will necessarily conform to that experience that you've had it so far, that you're remembering it correctly, that there is the existence of universal components, for example, that you in fact exist as a mind, for example, is something that you can't prove, that there is an external world. These are universals, which are actually relationships between various experiences, which are not logically provable if you observe reality itself, unless you find, there's nothing about matter that gives you the notion that there is an external world, like that
okay.
exists in the concept of.
I don't agree with like all these absolute terms. There's nothing. There's a ton of corroborating data, or there's like a ton of corroborating information that
information itself is based on judgments. That's the problem. Like that's what he's saying. He's like, these judgments that we are making to justify our judgments are just more relations of ideas. it's like you can't breach. You can't.
As opposed to what though?
So this is like this is like the really like a philosophical, well, opposed to Kant, which would say that these like the experience necessarily contains these a priori concepts. So he's like, what are you talking about? You wouldn't have even experienced the unity of an object if you didn't have fundamental concepts of space and time applied to the experience. So like the fact that you experience that it implies an a priori component. It has already been made intelligible by your mind. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there's no reason that it can't exist as some sort of like corroborating information that matter is as we seem to experience it.
But it's more of like what matter is. What you're saying, what matter is as we experience it. Like, why are you even saying that the category of judgment of matter exists external to your judgment, your experience of it?
Well, because we can use instruments to measure matter, and a variety of instruments that can translate the information that matter sends off that we're able to receive through our senses, but also that other instruments are able to receive and be able to display and translate in certain ways that we're then able to understand as well. And we can compare how certain matter, under the observation of those instruments, can interact with other matter that we are not, really directly interfacing with, other than the way that we read the information that's being translated into a different way. Like that's one form of corroboration that occurs through empiricism, right?
But it's always happened to be made intelligible. Like what he's saying is that the empirical itself is happening to be made intelligible by a mind, and is conforming itself to a mind. So it's all existing in a mind. So any information that you have on the idea of a mind independent reality, well, it can't be mind independent because it's necessarily dependent upon your mind to be intelligible.
I don't like the term it can't be independent. It can exist independent of the mind because you need the mind to experience it. The word can't is making a huge presumption, right? Like, can it not be that matter exists outside of our ability to experience it?
Well, yeah, like it's like, as in, like, it's not that matter. It's more of the fact that the what matter is actually a judgment. It's not like it's an intuition, as you would call it, like a unified experience, like you touch a physical object or something like that. But then there is the judgment, which is the categorical, like you reflect rather upon the experience of matter, and you create judgments about that on the experience of things, and you create judgments of those things, and then you use instruments to enhance the amount of information you can get about those things, and increase the scope of your sensibility. More and more tests to prove the reoccurrence of an event, a cause and event sequence, or like you prove, let's say, like a mechanistic predictive model. You're able to actually create the event, which then and you can predict, like, with like mathematical certainty, certain things that would occur. And you can use, let's say, like the Large Hadron Particle Collider to smash like hadrons together and measure the energy, which then is able to give you information about like the fundamental constitutive components of your space-time experience. But all of this is conforming itself to space and time,
which may not exist outside of our ability to experience it the way that we do as space and time. I understand. My question. Okay, go ahead.
I actually disagree somewhat with Kant, because he would say that this points towards what's called the existence of the noumena, the thing in itself, the unconditioned, and that we must necessarily accept that there is an unconditioned reality beyond our observation. I don't think that we necessarily need to make that jump, that we need to assume the existence of the noumena. We do need to assume the existence of a reality that's not necessarily conditioned to our our experiences, but there is no I would argue that if we were to assume the existence of a reality that is in and of itself unintelligible, then we are assuming the existence of an ontology which is in and of itself like what would be the word to the best way to describe this, is in and of itself like that we have no actual reason to assume that it exists, because there would be no mechanism of judgment from which we can make. So if we can have if he's right in saying that we can have absolutely no knowledge of it, then why is he saying that we must assume it exists?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last bit one more time?
So if he's saying that there is like if we must assume that we can have absolutely no knowledge of it, why must we assume that it exists? Now, he would say it's transcendental, right? Like, it necessarily must be presumed. It just has to be. It has to be presumed that there is a reality external. I don't think so. I would say that you could say that all of this, that reality, could only exist as we know it, as it could be known, and as we must assume is possible. Like, as in, like, possible being a categorical judgment of logic, like a logical function. If you would assume that there was something which is non-categorizable, then then the notion of possibility could no longer obtain to it, because that would be categorizing it. So I can't assume it exists. I can't assume or not assume its existence. And this,
well, it's not a complete leap of faith, right?
I would probably say it is. I think this is where we would say, like, it transcends our experience, and this is where he leaves room for God, really.
Okay, hold on. Before we go there, how does it transcend our experience? Like, I understand the concept and the thought experiment of, if all we can know can only be known through our ability to experience and understand things, and simply, like, it sounds like this is like a very long and masturbatory exercise at posing the question, what if things exist outside of our ability to understand them? Well, then we wouldn't be able to understand them, and that we have no reason to believe these things exist outside of our ability to understand them. We have to just maintain some space. We have to maintain the availability for it to be true. What is the function of considering this outside of just going, that's a neat thought experiment, back to my life?
Well, I think it shows one, the limits. Like, so Kant basically argues that this necessarily needs to be engaged in to show the limits of human understanding, so that we can understand, like, maybe exercises in futility, for example, when we're just wasting our lives trying to work out things that are impossible to work out. There's also the refining of, or what he calls like I think he says, the way he describes it, like basically it's like, basically you wouldn't use like a microscope without understanding how it works. And if this is our instrument of observation, then we need to understand how to refine and better our instruments of observation, so that we can understand what are the necessarily assumed parts of our understanding, which might not necessarily be in reality. So we need to understand what we are assuming about reality, so that we can get a better, more holistic understanding about what we're actually observing, as in the limits of, like, how much of this component, how much of an object is actually just our beliefs about an object that we've presumed, rather than the object itself.
What is the existence of a thing for which you believe we don't have much reason to believe that, like, an object exists outside of all the ways that we're able to measure it, including directly through our senses?
Well, like, as in, like, what use is this? Like, of the belief in the object? Well, I think it's just saying, like, one, it necessarily has to be presumed, and moreover, he's doing this to defend science. He's doing this to defend science against induction. So he's basically he's using this to defend the Newtonian physics against empiricism. So, like, a scientific explanation of reality, if it didn't assume this transcendental approach, would undermine an explanation of reality itself. So it's like you've got two options. You can assume constant conjunction, and that you can assume constant conjunction, and say that mechanistic explanations of reality actually may never hold, and that this is all an assumption, and causal explanations of reality are fundamentally generalizations that we've built. Or you can say that no, this is actually a genuine explanation of reality, but that this reality that we live in every way, shape, and form, has conformed itself to our sense experience to some degree, and it is so far intelligible. So it's one of those things. It's one of those things that you can't really get out of, and that's what he's just trying to show. Like, yeah, we in science can get an explanation of the physical world, but the physical world doesn't exist external to us.
Well, okay, is that not making a grand assumption?
Well, actually, sorry. In many ways, you're right in saying that we make an assumption saying that the physical world doesn't exist outside of us.
We have to entertain the possibility that it doesn't. I think is more honest.
It's more of the fact that we cannot say that it does or doesn't to any degree that would make it more intelligible. Like we should neither believe nor disbelieve that there is a physical reality external to us, because we can, by definition, not have knowledge of it.
Well, I mean, I kind of reject the idea that like it may be the case that our entire representation and like the degree to which the world is intelligible, perhaps outside of our ability to sense that it is that the function of these senses and our entire faculties for conceptualization and understanding may be completely reflexive in a way that does reflect that these things do exist to a certain degree. Like, I feel like you're assigning some agency, or Kant maybe is assigning some agency to a mind that makes things intentional, that there's like some workings of a mind that is meaning to represent things in a way other than that they are received, when it may be entirely reflexive, and it may just be like a Newton's cradle of sensory data, creating like an image and a concept that represents that sensory data quite well.
Well, it's like I think his point really is just to say, like, it's like, I think Thomas Reid made a very similar point in relation to Hume. He's like, well, because Hume's like, why should I believe that there is an external world at all?
Okay, because you get a bunch of sensory information, and like instruments corroborate that information.
Yeah, but then you say, like, well, why should I believe that my instruments, even like my eyes or whatever instruments I'm using to measure, necessarily are measuring anything that is not, because it's all actually still conforming itself to me, right? But before that, like, so Reid basically says that the constitution of the eye, if you look at it, fundamentally is it basically applies Euclidean, like a non-Euclidean geometrics. He basically, through the constitution of the eye, shows that there is a that it basically acts as a near perfect energy conservation. Like, it's the same thing with the ear, right? Like the cochlea in the ear vibrates to such a fine degree that it's like almost an almost perfect energy conservation. Why would it need to do that unless it was conforming itself to something external? That he kind of points out that the sense organs themselves seem to be trying to gain information about a reality so that we can live in it. and he's like, if you actually believed anything that you said, you would just die. It is basically his kind of realist response, and he's right, like against Hume. But the problem is with Kant, if you were to say, like, no, you could fully function, like everything about reality is real, and it exists as it is. It necessarily contains a real component. The problem is that, and it's not even that your faculties aren't real. They are themselves real. They are just subjective. So it also contains a necessarily subjective component. So we exist in a combination of matter. We exist in a combination of reality and judgment, and that can never be breached. Because if we try to say that we didn't live in this combination, then we wouldn't be judging it and we wouldn't know what it is. Does that make sense?
Yes. It seems like a very roundabout and long-winded way of saying we can only know things as we can know them through our mind, and we have to entertain the possibility of things existing that we can't understand or something.
Yeah, well, I think Hegel kind of puts it like this. So like, where the empiricist is forced to say nothing can exist in the senses without first nothing can exist in the intellect without first existing in the senses. Like he says that's fair enough, but we must also agree that nothing can exist in the senses without having first existed in the intellect. That there is a reciprocal relationship between the intellect, which understands reality, and reality as it's experienced.
Okay, what does this have to do with free will? I still don't have a definition, your definition of free will. You told me it falls into the hermeneutic definition of free will. I wasn't able to get any information on this. I did try to research it.
Yeah, so I send you over the, I don't know if you could access it. I'll send you over the book, this book, Free Will and Continental Philosophy by David Edward Rose. And I think I said chapter 4. And specifically, he gives, in chapter 4, he gives a breakdown of 3 possible models of human behavior. And the reason these are important is because the first model is empiricism, the causal explanation of human action in relation to a physical, causal inference. Event A causes event B, and humans are explained by this. You unfortunately lose all notion of agency, right? And then you have expressivism, which is sorry, I'm actually freezing. So you have expressivism, which is like metaphysical expressivism, which is like the attempt of us to express an explanation of reality which conforms itself to our will, our like teleological conception of reality. Like we are willing a reality, or we are essentially creating agreements about reality so that we can it kind of somewhat similar to pragmatism, where we pragmatically conform reality to ourselves to obtain certain goals, and these goals necessarily allow us to understand reality itself. So reality is conforming to us in this respect, but it is conforming to us in a way which is absolutely conforming to the subject. It's like kind of one-sided. Reality is expressed only in terms of desire of the agent towards it. Then you have a hermeneutic account, which is the relationship we have with our interpretation of reality. So if an empiricist account is the explanation of reality through empirical observation, a hermeneutic account understands that empirical observation is in and of itself part of our conception, and through understanding that conception, we can understand reality in a different way, which necessarily changes how we perceive reality, and then that perception of reality, modifying reality, necessarily allows us to conceive of reality again, and we are in a constant reciprocal interpretable relationship between our conceptions of reality, our applied judgments of reality, which are universal. The particular instances or individual instancing of those categories of judgment within reality. So we make judgments about reality. We observe those judgments. Those judgments change our observations. So observing those judgments. Yeah, so we make judgments about reality, which makes reality conform to certain specifications. Like I'm like, this is a cup. This is like, I make certain material explanations of reality, which then allows me to engage with reality in a way which makes it intelligible. And that intelligibility allows me to conceive of reality in a new way. And then that new conception of reality allows me to, that new experience of that conception allows me to conceive of reality in a new way again. And I constantly reinterpret my own thoughts about reality or about experience itself. So we are thinking that is thinking about itself fundamentally in an infinite loop.
I have to be honest. I feel like I understand about like 10% of the things you've said.
That is today absolutely fair enough. So I guess basically the reason, like the way that like how you get to hermeneutics in the first place is basically like a hermeneutic conception of truth is by understanding the Kantian conception of truth as defeating the empiricist conception of truth. So the Kantian conception of truth shows that there is a fundamental mental component or like categorical judgment, like a priori component would be the best way to use it, something prior to experience, as necessarily grounding experience itself and making it intelligible. The hermeneutic argument is basically saying that we aren't confined to those categories of judgment that Kant believed we were confined to, because in observing those categories of judgment, we then can negate those categories of judgment and reimagine how we are objectifying the world, which then makes the world intelligible in a new and differing way. It's like, have you ever seen the film Arrival, like the sci-fi film Arrival?
Mm-hmm.
In Arrival, when the like, spoiler to everyone who hasn't seen it, how they basically have to learn this alien language, and when they learn the language, they gain new faculties of time, which allows them to reimagine like a non-linear notion of time. For Kant, that would be absolutely impossible. Like you'd be like, no, that would be fundamentally impossible. Like you can't have a non-linear conception of time. But for someone like Hegel or for like Gadamer, by understanding your linear notion of time, if you were to learn the concepts, let's say, of a new language, and you would actually learn these concepts, and that language implied a non-linear conception of time, then you would discover a new way of understanding reality, and you'd conform reality into a new and differing way. And what Hegel is basically saying, where Kant says there is this reality which is mind independent, which absolutely exists external to all categories of judgment. Hegel's like, that's absolutely false. Like the truth maker cannot be absolutely independent of truth. So what truth actually is, so what reality isn't totally conformed or conditioned reality, like conditioned existence, excuse me, but it's in fact every possible mode of conditioning that could actually exist. And so perfect knowledge and truth wouldn't be the removal of your faculties. It would be the understanding of every possible faculty or every possible categorical judgment that you could make logically about reality. And that is what reality is. That is what truth is. And so it's all entirely mind dependent. Reality is absolutely ideal, which is why he's called an absolute idealist. Reality is entirely well, truth and like knowledge is absolutely mental. It cannot breach into that. There is even no reason to believe that there is anything external to a mind.
Okay, we've tread this territory before. I disagree that there is no reason to believe that there's anything external to a mind. I've talked about why. There's already like a ton of corroborating information that is poured through this filter of our mind. We don't know the nature of which our mind, really creates these conceptions. It could just be completely reflexive and that we are getting a cheap facsimile, but that just by nature of the fact that we are getting a conceptualization or are receiving this sense data, that may be all the corroborating evidence that's needed to just stand as some demonstration that reality exists outside of our ability to conceive it. As far as we know.
Well, there's kind of two things to say. I think one, like necessarily, your explanation of reality as matter could never be matter, because then it would like it has to both be, it can't actually be the thing, and it's like saying how do I put this?
There seems to be a chicken and egg like consideration. You've spoken very much in favor of the idea that that objects exist because we experience them. But can it not be that we experience objects because they exist? That we experience things because they exist outside of our mind?
Well, it's more of like the fact that like what we're experiencing, it's like what we are experiencing is always inside of our mind. Like you couldn't be outside of your.
Our experience of it is limited to our experience of it. Yes.
Yes.
And perfectly circular and simplistic and reductive understanding. Yes, I understand. I understand that you can't break out of that, but that I don't think that necessarily creates implications about the objective existence of things.
It's more of the fact that like, what do you even mean by objective? When we start getting past this point, like we're going to start like talking about categories of judgment. Like, what do you mean by an object?
The possibility that an object may exist outside of our ability to experience it.
Okay, and what do you mean by possibility?
Possibility is simply that if you were to remove the ability to experience things, that those things may still exist beyond their ability to be experienced.
I mean, like just what is possibility?
Possibility just literally meaning that it's a thing that can occur.
Okay, and what is a thing? Like what is fundamentally like a thing that can occur? Like.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, the existence of a thing that we have yet to discover, at some point, if we discover it, then then it may be that may serve as evidence that it existed before our discovery of it.
Okay, but like, so give me an example of something that is fundamentally. Can you give me an example of something that's fundamentally impossible?
That's fundamentally impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Can I give you an example of something that's fundamentally impossible? Man, that's a tough one, actually. Not off the top of my head.
So, like a square circle.
I almost feel like the skeptical part of me wants to create some room, to entertain the possibility of a square circle. But sure.
But like, okay, like, but let's say you were to entertain, let's say, the possibility of a square circle. So you were to sustain an absolute contradiction. Mm-hmm. Then you would negate the like logical law of non-contradiction, right? Which is a category of judgment. Now there are times when I think that this can be like not necessarily breached, because I don't think even Hegel says that, although some people interpret him that way. But like there are certain, let's say, like for example, can a thing ever be itself? Can it ever be itself and not itself?
Can it ever be itself and not itself?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, like, so how could something be and not be simultaneously?
That very much depends on the definition of what it is to be.
Yeah, but it's like even just exist in any form. Like no matter what definition, you can plug any definition you want in it. Like just be, right?
Sure.
You're implying that it is that this is the kind of the point about non-contradiction, and even the principle, like the law of identity, that a thing is itself. You even say that something exists, that there is a reality which exists. requires a category of judgment. You are already engaged in, let's say, a logical analysis of the world. So when you're talking about possibility and impossibility, you've already implied that there is a correct categorization that there is already a fundamentally logical reality. Like there is already a reality which can necessarily be understood. Because otherwise, like you would say, like, could there not possibly exist something which is impossible, would be the conclusion of what Kant would basically be showing with the transcendental logic, or attempting to show that there would be something outside of existence, or something outside of experience, that we could have knowledge of something from which, or even a belief in something which is fundamentally beyond belief. It's like saying like something would have to, like, so for example, it would say like, square circles exist, or that there is I don't know, like I'm trying to think of another example of like that like, you know, like that 2 and 2 could equal 5 in reality. It's like if it did exist, then, like, for example, like if it did exist, I would never be able to know it existed. But it's more than that. It's to say that
maybe not never.
No, it would. But I would agree.
There may be some instrument that, you know, we could eventually conceive of. There may be properties of reality that we just haven't stumbled upon or been able to measure in ways that make sense to us. That could make that potentially possible.
Even if like this is basically the foundations of cosmic horror. If you know anything about like H.P. Lovecraft, where he's like, well, there could be a reality which didn't conform to our opinion of it. It would just send you insane. You know. You would basically look at, you know, you'd say like we would basically retreat to the warm confines of logic, you know, where like if you were to see a world, if you were to perceive something exist and not exist, come in and out of being, change form and shape before your eyes, and then be everything and nothing simultaneously, and that is what you saw. He's like, yeah, you would go insane, because the only thing stopping you from going insane is reason in the first place, and you've just saw something which is fundamentally irrational by nature.
Okay.
So like this is the thing, like you could not say that a thing exists. Like you actually, you know, it's like The Thing. Yeah, have you ever seen The Thing? John
Carpenter?
Yeah, like, you know, you know how it like constantly morphs and changes. Like what is it? Like where's it going to be? Like it constantly it can't really be pinned down. Yeah, that would be the noumena.
Sure.
So to say that you can't say that it can or can't be anything, because it's not confined to judgment. It can't be confined to judgment. So to say that it is possible or impossible, it has no meaning.
Mm-hmm. But we pretty consistently find that where things existed as noumena, they later exist as things that corroborate our experience. I feel like that's pretty consistent throughout the history of like the progression of science and understanding of the nature of reality. I'm sorry?
I think I understand where our issues are. Like, that's not noumena. Like, things that we don't understand or currently don't understand, like gaps in our knowledge, are not noumena. Like, the noumena exists as the absolutely unknowable, as in like logically impossible, like as in like categorical judgments, which are judgments, or judgmentless judgments. Like you can't really explain this without talking into a paradox. That's what it is, and there are certain paradoxes which he says that we have to assume. So these are the paralogisms and the antinomies, and this is how Kant basically explains free will. because the self, which makes reality fundamentally causal, has to exist as we exist as an object to ourselves, and our minds exist as an experience from which we are interpreting, but it is the mind's entering reality which gives it causal explanation. And so there is no reason to believe that we could not be free, because...
Or anything for that matter. There's actually no reason to believe anything, right?
Well, that would be the Hegelian kind of response, that there is no reason to believe like anything, external. But like, so Kant would basically say there'd be no reason to believe that there was a causal explanation of mind external to us. But he basically points out, to be honest, that we necessarily, I think he argues, if I'm honest, that they necessarily must assume freedom to some degree.
Why necessarily? And to what degree?
Actually, someone in chat said something really good there. He says that it may be the case that you're confusing the concepts themselves with consistency with inert matter. So in other words, like a concept can be consistent without having a reference. So just because we haven't discovered an aspect of reality yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So like those things that we discover in science, they would be like judgments that we simply have not made yet, or not had the references necessary to make them. Like, so for example, with the Large Hadron Collider, we get new information to make new judgments about reality, which allows us to explain reality in greater, more detailed mechanistic ways. What Kant's pointing towards is something which would necessarily exclude those judgments. So it'd be like constructing an experiment which you never see and then get all the information from.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to like sidetrack there. I was just thought it might help kind of allude to the difference between like what Kant is, because Kant is very much a scientist in terms of his belief structure. He's very much trying to defend science. And so is Hegel, actually.
Okay. I'm going to try to boil this down as simply as possible. It sounds like your definition of free will is based on an assumption that since the only things you can only know through your experience, and that you cannot know things outside of your ability to experience it. Therefore, if you simply just understand free will and you have an understanding of it, then it's as real as your ability to know a rock or any other physical or material thing.
No, not really. So
okay.
But Alex, that's my fault, right? So basically, if we understand, like when we're analyzing ourselves, we're understanding ourselves in this like sort of this format, right? And so ourselves, we like you're right in saying that there is this fundamental, that like, for example, Kant, I think, would say that there is this noumenal self, this self which exists in a way which is uncategorizable and necessarily must exist. And so we can assume that it's free. But he goes a step further in these antinomies, and he basically points out that the way causation works is that a causal series of events is explained through the existence of a chain of events which necessarily flow from cause to effect, and that every effect has a cause, and every cause has a prior cause, and every cause has a prior, not ad infinitum, but there are two ways to judge it. You can say that there is an infinite amount of causes, or you can say that there is a first cause. Now, if you say that there is an infinite amount of causes, you end up in a bit of a problem, because you're necessarily saying that nothing could have actually started the chain of causation. So there is no necessary inference, no necessary reason to say that one thing must flow from cause to effect. Anyway, like there is no ground from which to say that this causation actually, like this causal chain, actually must flow, like as in there was never a first domino. We are just seeing falling dominoes, but we are just going to have to assume that there is an infinite amount of dominoes in order to explain this. But then Kant's kind of saying like, well, the reason you are having to do that in the first place is because of the fundamental unity of nature, which implies a mechanistic explanation, and that would have to be the cause of this causal sequence, right? And so you basically end up undermining your notion of a cause if you don't assume a first cause, which is why you'll hear, especially a lot of Christians, because they love this shit, a necessary first cause. And so a necessary first cause would be, like the Big Bang in theory, like or whatever, whatever it would necessarily be, like the first instancing of a material causal sequence within the universe. Now, if you assume that there is a necessary first cause, the problem is that itself is breaching the causal sequence, because how could there be a first cause if everything has to have a cause? The first cause can't have a cause, and so is inherently paradoxical. And so you have to assume that it entered a causal sequence spontaneously. It simply just happened. But if you assume that first cause simply just happened, then then there's no reason to assume that any other cause couldn't simply just happen or not happen. So then there is no necessary relationship between cause and effect anymore. And you've destroyed cause and effect. And you can't destroy cause and effect because the argument essentially defeats itself. Like you end up trying to prove two negatives if they disprove each other.
Chicken.
There'll be no ordering of the world for them to be able to make that argument in the first place. And so the way he solves this is saying that, well, actually it's an explanation not of reality, but of causation. That something could enter into causal experience, give meaning and essentially structure and order the world without having still existed, and it spontaneously came to be.
You're causing me to have brain cancer.
Towards ordering the world and making it conform is space and time. So he basically says, as mind and as reality, it makes causation occur with it. And so for causation to be assumed in the first place, you necessarily have to assume the what would be the word?
Well, yeah, it is your boy, Wicked Supreme.
Of an agent.
God bless Wicked and God bless Chicken. It has been 3 months, I think. I don't know, buddy, keeping it up. So who is the guy on the left, man?
Prior to
he's rambling bigly.
A cause of that agency.
I think I understand. I understood some of that. The idea that, like, well, if we're saying that everything is the output of a cause, then what was the first cause and what came before that? And that we can't really conceptualize that. That doesn't necessarily defeat, like, there is an assumption being made, which is, well, if something had to be the first thing which caused everything else, then how did that thing come into being? You must assume that it simply just happened. I'm not necessarily sure that you must assume that. Like, there could be, I don't think it's as binary as that, or I don't think it necessarily has to be as binary as that. And either way, it doesn't necessarily undo causality. Like, if there was something that happened without a cause, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that happened after it has the potential to happen without a cause or something like that.
But I think his point is to say that the only reason that we believe that cause is a necessary relationship that our foundations of causation being a necessary relationship are dependent upon realities conforming to that causal relationship. So if reality seemingly did not have to conform to that causal relationship, then there is no reason to believe that this causal relationship.
Not no reason.
Well, yeah, no, there is no reason. It can't.
No, it's the other way around. It's that there is the potential that we can entertain the idea that at least one thing happened without a cause.
Well, it's more of the fact that it's not. I think it wouldn't. Maybe you're right in saying one thing, but I think this is why I think Hegel offers a better explanation than just saying that you can't really entertain the idea of a thing external to this sequence in the first place. And I think that like the only things that like the only way that you can for example, like the reason to believe that let's say the spontaneity of existence is because that reality is a fundamental component of this. That there has to be something, or at least there has to be something, and then that your intuitions of the world are conforming, whatever that is, to that thing. Like that thing is conforming to your intuitions, but your belief in something external to its intelligibility is absolutely being presumed. You're just presuming it because you.
Yep, I don't disagree.
Yeah, so Kant basically says that's transcendental. It must be. Hegel says it doesn't. It doesn't have to be. You're only doing it because of a lack of knowledge of reality, and that lack of knowledge of reality could be conceptually explained through all possibility, which is necessarily identical with reality, since it would represent truth, and the truth of reality. And so you would basically respond by saying, actually, the causal sequence could be that time could become meaningless. Space and time could become not meaningless, but rather non-confining to a being who understood all possibility. And so God could fundamentally enter in and out of various conceptions of time or non-time, and still make rational judgments and still make actions which are intelligible. And that would be his response. And that's absolute spirit. But that's like, I don't want to go into all of the nuances with that position, although I think Hegel is probably one of the best thinkers on this. It is essentially an explanation that human action is understood in relation to concepts which are constantly developing, and so the logic of reality is constantly developing. And so we have fundamentally the possibility of not undoing, but conceiving of a reality which is not fundamentally causal in the way that we do. And I think we're already approaching that in some respects with and I think it's intelligible to us in 300 years on, in a way that makes more sense, because we look at something like
because we're aware of a new piece of information that fits in or something.
Yeah, well, because we've got development in what he would call a development in logic. We have new modes of thinking that would have been unavailable to prior generations, and those modes of thinking are like quantum mechanics. We can see effects that precede causes, and we're like, well, fuck. You know what I mean? And I think that, but obviously Hegel wouldn't have access to this information, so I think it's actually really quite intuitive, really quite not the word intuitive, like well structured, really well thought out. But the point is that regardless of how we look at it, reality is necessarily conforming to a immaterial component for it to be understood, and Hegel would even say for it to be. For us to even be able to assume the possibility, like you agreed before, that there is no reason to just believe that there is an object external to us.
No, I don't agree that there is no reason. I think there's tons of corroborating information and that we're having to make an inference somewhere, but I wouldn't say that there's no reason.
Okay. I kind of see this as like almost like special pleading, right? Like I have a reason to believe in something that I cannot have reasons to believe in. Like, where would you say that the evidence for this is? Like
through all the sensory data and corroborating information that we get through instruments and their ability to, display information that corroborates our sensory data in different ways and translate them into different ways that we're still able to make sense of.
Yeah, but all of that is just different modes of information, which are then still requiring a priori.
Sure, but it's more than nothing.
But it's information of the phenomena, not the noumena. That's the point. Like in the Kantian terms, it's information of what you are sensing, not what is definitionally external to what you can perceive. It's logically. It's logically impossible to access. The noumena is nothing and everything. It can't. The only thing that can say about it is that it is. You know what I mean? That's the point.
I see. All right. Well, we're going on 2 hours. I don't really have a very good idea of your understanding of free will, but maybe I'm going to talk to some people that can maybe catch me up to speed and help me acquire the building blocks necessary to understand some of these concepts. And maybe we'll meet again. Yeah.
Sorry that I might have obviously went on a bit in terms of trying to explain. I just feel like this is a difficult, a quite high level philosophy to explain. It's something that you would probably find in at the very least, like maybe like third year undergraduate. So like obviously trying to explain it is, and as well trying to make it intelligible to the audience. Because you seem like an intuitive, like intelligent guy, but I know that a lot of my audience even get lost off if you anywhere near this stuff. So trying to break this down is really quite difficult. And so if I've been a bit redundant and a bit overly explanative,
I think some practical examples might have been really helpful, but I can look for those at somebody that are maybe some people that are engaging near my level.
Like if you want any like sources, or I could probably find something on this that may help. But if you just Google like the problem of induction, and then there is even updates to the problem of induction, and understand necessarily why there has to be like a transcendental component which would fundamentally explain reality, then I think it should give you the explanation of why you can't assume something like causation, the existence or non-existence of causation prior to a mind, which is why the conclusion, if I will, of the position of a continental philosopher usually within the book Free Will and Continental Philosophy that I recommended, is really that the problem of free will is actually the problem. It's not something that we can ever answer. Talking about free will, the existence of a free agent and a non-free agent implies an explanation of reality which is definitionally unexplainable, or the existence of a god. So yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for your time. Appreciate you.
Okay, and thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate it, and I recommend everyone on my stream check out Wicked Supreme. Anyway, take it easy, man.
You too.